fine. So, but yeah, well, it's great that we're connecting on different sides of the globe here. So thank you for taking a minute out.
I am loving it. I've been listening to your podcast, and I like the energy. I like
Good.
the way that you do your interviews. So I'm really excited for today.
Absolutely, I am too. Well, again, it's great to meet you, and I would like to begin our conversation before we get into your journey of being in Portugal and being a writer by asking you, 4 years ago with this pandemic, it was rather momentous for all of us. We
Yes.
were all trying to figure out how long it was going to last. It was digging in at this point 4 years ago. How did you finally make it through the pandemic, and how did it ultimately change you?
Oh, I'm a little hesitant to tell this story because it's very different from everyone else's story. I had been a digital nomad for 4 years, trying to decide where I wanted to live. I knew I wanted to live not in California and not in New England, where I had worked and lived most of my life. So I traveled all over the US as a nomad. I traveled all over Europe, but I concentrated on places that, where I wouldn't have to ever shovel snow again.
Yeah, good for you.
That kind of thing. So I was looking, and so those 4 years I spent, I kept coming back to Portugal. And I just kept falling more and more in love with Portugal. And so I planned to move here, and I was in the process of getting my residency visa, which is a process. It takes a while.
Yeah.
And I had an apartment, so I thought, I'm going to go over on my regular passport, and I'm going to set up the apartment, and then I'm going to come back to the US and finish my visa. That was the big plan.
Yeah.
And so I arrived in Portugal in early February of 2020. And I went and I spent a couple days getting the apartment ready. And then I went and met with an accountant and went to what they call the NIF office, which is where you get like your financial number, which is separate from your Social Security.
Yeah.
And I was in the NIF office with him, and everyone was talking about the first two cases of this new COVID thing that had just arrived in Portugal. And Portugal reacted very differently than the US to COVID. So I had lunch with my accountant, got my NIF, set up my bank accounts, went back to my apartment. I had an appointment to go in and get my income tax status, another thing you have to do. And that was 3 days later. And I arrived at the office for my appointment, and there was a security guard, and the doors were closed, and he had his hand out like this, stopping everyone and saying, all government offices are shut down. Everybody needs to go home. So I was literally in Portugal on a regular passport, that's 90 days, when they shut everything down.
Wow.
And Portugal said immediately, if you are in Portugal, you are now a Portuguese citizen. You're expected to follow all of our rules and our laws, and you will get all of the benefits of being a citizen, including healthcare and any services that you might need. And don't worry about your passports. Don't worry about anything. So I was in a surfer beach town, not unlike Santa Cruz or Carmel, California, in a beautiful apartment in the hills in a little bit of a rural area, about a 15-minute walk to the beach down the hill. I had hills to roam through. I had neighbors that could yell at each other over the fence in friendly terms. I had people all around me growing food and sharing food across fences. I had a government that enforced the rules and treated everybody equally and made sure everybody had health care. And I could go and sit on the beaches were closed. But the lovely thing about the Portuguese people is they love to follow rules, but they also are highly skilled at getting around the rules so they don't break the rules, but they still figure out how to do what they want to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the beaches were closed, but the rocks that led to the beaches weren't. So you'd go out in the evening and there'd be people sitting on the rocks watching the surf come in, but like very distant from each other. It was like looking at some kind of painting of meditative people. And so, honestly, if you were going to pick a place to be in a worldwide pandemic, I was in the absolute best place to be. And I wrote it out with good neighbors and food delivery to my door from the farmers themselves, and healthcare and safety and no worries about legality of being here. It was wonderful. So, not your typical COVID story.
No, it's not, and it's wonderful. And I got to tell you real quick, your story and the way you tagged that at the end about being the best place on earth that you could be at. When 9/11 2001 happened, I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, Italy. And at that point, I was backpacking in my 20s and I just didn't contact home much. So at that point, everything was on. My flight from Paris to Kansas City didn't exist anymore. Everything was changed.
Right.
So the place I went to after Venice was called Cinque Terre. It's the poor man's Riviera. It was a
I know
whole,
where that is. Yes.
okay, it was an old hippie commune. We were in Vernazza, and I thought as my body floated in the Baltic Ocean 2 days after, if there was any place in the world that I need to be sheltered from the horrors of what was going on, that was
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally get it, you know. And everybody was so good, so accommodating, so welcoming when they knew we were American. So it was cool.
That's the thing. It's when you're in a place where everybody's just agreeing to take care of everybody else.
Yeah, that's it.
And you're welcome, whoever you are. And that is very much what Portugal is all about. It's their whole culture, actually.
I love it. I love it. So let's get to the heart and soul uh, about what you do on a daily basis as a writer. I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders. And one of the kids is curious and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Well, that's an excellent question, of course. Um, I have been a writer since I was about 11 or 12 years old. I have been writing my whole life, and I'm 73 right now. So that's a long time writing.
Yeah,
And while I've done many other things to earn money and take care of my family during those years, I have never stopped writing. That's always been what I did. So for my entire adult life, I also wrote books. I like writing fiction. I've written some nonfiction. That's very practical kind of business stuff, right?
yeah,
But the fiction that's what comes from my soul and my heart.
yeah,
And one of the things that I do for a living besides writing is I am a cognitive behavioral therapist practitioner. I'm a emotional intelligence coach and a writing coach. And my passion in life, besides writing, is to make sure that everyone has a joyous life,
yeah,
which is not to say that you're always happy,
right.
because that's not realistic and you don't want to be. You
Yeah,
want to have the ability to feel all of the emotions.
yeah,
But as you're doing that, knowing you have your best life and that you're doing what you love to do. And so I want to lead people towards living their passion.
yeah,
And the best way for me to do that is to do that myself. So writing, moving to Portugal, living in this particular house in this particular city, everything I do is based on the idea of, is this the most genuine, real, joyous thing that I can do? And writing for me is that. That's what the fiction that I write. I don't do genre fiction.
yeah,
I do literary fiction. I've done fantasy. I should say in the past I've done fantasy, but everything I write is not so much about the plot or a particular kind of way of structuring the book, but more about exploring what it means to be human,
yeah,
what it means to be joyous, what it means to recognize your passion, and what it means to kind of acknowledge those little voices in our heads that are both positive and negative, and what to do with those little voices.
yeah, yeah. Well, and you're in the driver's seat of that, being in Portugal and doing what you do to help people and exploring worlds through words that are fiction is grand. I mean, That's what you want to do. So let's take this line here in Portugal and let's draw it backwards. Let's go to the beginning of your life. Tell me where you were born and raised and how this love of the word and this love of wanting to help others through therapy and coaching, how did these seeds become who you are today?
Well, I don't want to, we could talk for hours and hours about my childhood because it's complex.
Yeah.
But I was born in Central California, in Fresno, California.
Yeah.
Um, and I was blessed to have a father that really loved knowledge.
Yeah.
And so, and I had a natural tendency to be the kid in their room reading a book instead of the kid outdoors doing things,
Yeah.
right? I did both. I would go outdoors and read, but I was reading constantly. It just, I don't know why that was the case, but and that wasn't true for my brother or my mom or other people in my family. So I was unique. My father and I were unique in that. He passed away when I was about 12, about the time I just said I started writing. So that's interesting. I think I was writing before he passed away, but that kind of was a moment, one of those moments in your life. And my mother remarried to a gentleman who made it possible for me as a teenager, young person, to travel. So I went everywhere as a kid, um, from about 14 years old on. I became a world traveler. And when I traveled with my family, what that meant is we landed, we went to a fancy, fancy hotel. My parents would tell me what time I had to be at some dinner party or when we were going to go to the airport to leave. And that would be the last time I talked to them, and I was on my own.
Wow.
And so at 13, 14, 15, I was exploring Paris, Rome, Greece, Israel, all kinds of places on my own with no
Wow.
supervision. Matter of fact, I grew up my entire life with no supervision.
Wow. That's an
Yeah.
idyllic world.
And I didn't get, I didn't turn to crime or drugs or anything. I just existed and I took care of myself. So I was from a very early age, I was very independent. From a very early age, I was allowed and given opportunity to explore the world in a way that is so different from anyone else that I know of. Um, so my ability to travel on my own, to think about things, and this whole time I'm voraciously reading and also writing. So it just all came naturally because I also was born with a genetic immune problem. My immune system is everybody's heard of the boy in the bubble. Well, I'm the girl that should have been in the bubble but wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I was sick all my childhood as well. But nobody knew why. And then in my early adulthood, I was living in San Francisco and I was in UC, University of California's hospital in San Francisco. Excellent, excellent hospital. And I was put on a ward with a whole bunch of other people that had a disease that nobody knew what was going on because they didn't know what was going on with me. And that was the beginning of the AIDS HIV epidemic.
Yeah.
And because of that horrible, horrible epidemic, a lot of research was done on genetic and immune system studies.
Yeah.
And it was because of that, because of HIV and what went into the research for that, they were able to discover that I actually had, because remember, genetics is not an old science, it's a new
Right.
science.
Yeah.
They were able to figure out that I had a just genetic problem, that it's not that I'm sick, it's that I'm not, my system is off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So I was in my 30s by the time they figured that out. And that led me to have a lot of time in hospitals where I spent a lot of time thinking about my strange childhood and all of the things that had happened in my life. And that led me to healing, to figuring out how to heal.
Yeah.
And again, writing was very involved in that always. So I learned how to heal. I learned how to deal with loss because I lost so many friends through all these different things. Um, and that led me to ultimately, most of my career is as far as how I earned the majority of my money and supporting my family. I worked in the nonprofit sector with mid-size and large nonprofits in the USA that serve children in some capacity.
Mm.
So I did that and again wrote the whole time.
Wow.
And under a different name because I was a CEO of a big old nonprofit serving abused children
Yeah.
and writing a fantasy novel. And I needed to be the
Yeah.
face of the organization. So I wrote under a pseudonym.
Yeah.
This book, A Brush with Mortality, that I've just released a week ago, is my first literary novel under my own name
Wow.
after all these years.
Yeah.
And so it's a
Wow.
big deal for me. I'm really excited about it because it's me. It's just me out there.
Yeah.
I'm not hiding behind anything. I'm not having to wear two faces.
Yep.
I'm not having to do anything. And I went back to school also when I was a digital nomad. That's when I got my degree in psychology. Uh, I have multiple degrees because I
Sure.
tend to go back to school. It's that reading, learning thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep doing it. So
That's
that's
wild.
that. My journey has been that. And my
Yeah.
journey in fiction has always been each story, whether it's fantasy or this one, ha- are a way of looking at life and a way of looking at the big questions in life.
Yeah.
So this one, A Brush with Mortality, I'm hoping the readers will have to assess their own way of judging things
Yeah.
because as you go through the book, as you read the novel, and I'm happy to say the reviewers are having this reaction. They're going, why is this? And I don't agree with that. And I have this judgment about this person and that person, the characters in the novel. And then at the end, they go, oh, oh, I was completely wrong. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that because then you have to question your own judgment and recognize how we judge others and ourselves.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you were growing up, what was the book for you, the gateway book, the one that you remember the most?
That's so easy. Wind in the Willows.
Okay.
It's a children's book, but it's not really a children's book at all. It's by a British author named Graham. We know it as, you know it from the Disney movie Toad, about Toad
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Rat and Mole and Badger. But the book itself is this lovely book about British society, British friendships. It's a very male oriented book. The only female characters are some, I think the otters, there's otters that have a mom that's worried about the loss of her children. And so all the male animals go off and rescue the children, right?
Yeah.
Um, but that whole male female domination of literature or culture never struck me until I was much older.
Yeah.
In literature, I just saw it as people.
Yeah.
Right. And so the friendships that were described are described in that book, the way people both are selfish and helpful to one another. All those things had such a huge impact on me. And again, here's this fun story about a rat
Yeah.
and a toad and a badger and a mole. But for me, it was the underlying themes
Yeah.
of humanity that
Absolutely.
to me.
Absolutely. So in this life of yours that you've obviously been very inspired to live, who's been the hero for you, that inspiration for you?
Oh gosh. I I struggle with that question.
Yeah.
That's a question that gets asked a lot.
Sure.
I really struggle with it. Um, there are people that I deeply admire, right? Um, but I don't have any one set of people or one person that I go, oh, that was my guiding light.
Sure.
The only slight exception to that, and this goes back to my health issues, right? Is Lily Tomlin. No, not Lily Tomlin. I'm sorry. I'm completely blanking on the name. Isn't that awful?
Oh, it's okay.
She was married to Gene Wilder and was on
Oh,
SNL.
um, 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 uh,
Sorry.
we'll get there. We'll get there. We'll get there. Yeah.
She had
Gilda
horrible health.
Radner.
Yes, Gilda Radner. She had, first off, she had this amazing love. The two of them, Gene Wilder and she, had this
Hmm.
love story that I think is the best love story ever.
Yeah.
And she had these horrendous health issues.
Yep.
And she has her one of her quotes is that if it's not one thing, it's another, right? I mean, it's always something. It's always something. And I was going through so many health issues at the same time she was. And she was my inspiration for just picking joy and
Yeah.
picking a positive attitude. Uh, so I think she's the one I can pick out, but it's really hard. That's a hard question for
Yeah.
me.
I get it. And that's a great answer. So I'm curious, in your life, you've obviously you've been striving to do to live the best life that you can, and you're wanting to do that for your clientele. What
Yeah,
has been that inspiration to get up every day out of bed, to do this, to continually be the best version of you? What is that?
it's fun.
There you go.
It's all about joy. It's all about joy. And I think also there's for me, and I don't know where it came from. I can't tell you where this comes from, but for me, I've always had a very deep sense of a responsibility to community, right? So that's I ended up working in the nonprofit sector. I could have made 3 times as much money in the corporate world
Yeah.
doing the same job, but I was in the nonprofit sector. And even here, I'm currently here in Tumar. I'm building a sensory garden for something called the Associação a Crescer. They work with kids on the spectrum and kids with learning disabilities, and I'm building them a sensory garden because I'm
Wow.
living in this community. I'm an immigrant to Portugal. I'm living in this community. I'm living in this town that's giving me so much. And I feel a responsibility to give to the community in some way or another. And that brings me joy as well. It's not an obligation, it's a opportunity, it's a way of being high impact. Uh, when I'm gone, there's going to be a lot of things left behind that are lasting. And I like that. That gives me a happiness too. I don't need to be rich. I don't need to be famous,
Right.
but I need to know that I've had impact, positive impact. I should clarify. Well, there's a lot of us
Right.
having
Yeah.
negative impact out in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see that in America in very specific ways. So let me, I got to tell you, I have a deep level of admiration for that. My son's 19 and he's on the spectrum, and I've been in that special needs world my whole life. And
Mm,
I've always felt as though a lot of his therapists and even bus aides to me have been personal heroes. And I've tried to be very clear with them that's a big deal. And with what you're doing with these kids, it's very
yeah,
necessary. And I remember that time in his life when all of those sensory kind of environments were coming to birth, with the shaving creams and sands and all
yeah,
these tactile things and all these things that can help them in their therapeutic march to being on a better bell curve. It means a lot. And I think that I know I admire that quite a bit because there's a lot of things that Miles has been a part of in his life that have been just out of the joy. Like, for instance, there's one program that he does in the fall every year. And he's going on his ninth year, I think, and it's called Challenge Air. And it's a retired Vietnam veteran that was a pilot that goes to cities around America and gets other pilots, and they fly special needs kids around cities and they see landmarks from the air.
oh,
And
that is so
isn't
cool.
it cool? And
That is so
they
cool.
got like a red carpet with cheerleaders that cheer them as they go out. When they get off the flight, they get a certificate and they get wings and all of this stuff. And all of those things are so vital for them to feel just a little bit of triumph in a life that they just don't fall in line with. And you know that too, being sick. You get to a point where your reality is vastly different. I lost my best friend when I was 17, and he was chronically sick. He had liver issues, and he ended up
Mm.
passing away when we were teenagers. But he spent his whole life being sick in
Yeah.
hospitals. We'd run around and play outside. He'd come in and hook up to an IV, and it was just it wasn't any big deal. So anyway, I totally admire that. But I'm curious, in all of these adventures that you've been on and all of these things that you've accomplished and done, what are you ultimately the proudest of at the end of the day?
My son.
Yeah.
But I have to add that I lost control around the 8th month of pregnancy, so I can't really take any credit for anything. He's been his own person since literally before he was born,
Yeah.
and, I was very blessed in him. So the fact that I can get to say, "Look at this outstanding human being now," I'm proud of him, but I don't really take much credit for it. He's almost fabulous in spite of himself, and my standard running joke is that I think he could walk on water if he would just do as he was told.
You know what? It's interesting you I was thinking about this the other day with my son. There's things that he does that are very similar to what I have done in my life, and I haven't taught him any of that. And that whole nature nurture thing, you know what I'm saying? Like you
Yeah,
saying there's levels of you, because there's a lot of things that you're in control of. There's a lot of happiness and love that you've imbued in him.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
I get what you're saying. There's things that simply are out of the control of all of the forces that become who we are as people.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I was 8 months pregnant with him, maybe 8 and a half, it was pretty close to term. We went to a, Arthur Fiedler Pops concert.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but we sprang for the really expensive posh seats. We were at round tables on the ground floor and everything, which was crazy for a pregnant woman to do because there was no room to move at
Yeah.
all. Um, and they were playing something, but kind of heavy, like maybe Dvorak or something. And I started having the worst cramps of my life. And I thought, oh my God, am I going into labor? What's happening? So I worked my way out, and this is in San Francisco, and I'm sitting on the steps at the Opera House in San Francisco, just in absolute pain. And the classical music stopped, and the New Orleans Preservation Jazz Hall Band came out and started playing.
Wow.
And as soon as they started playing, all the pain went away.
Wow.
And my son started dancing. I could see it on my belly, right? Because he's doing this. Just and to this day, when he's on a dance floor, he still dances like that. It's crazy.
Wow.
And so all the pain went away because he just didn't like the music.
Wow.
But he
He was a
liked the
jazz
jazz.
kid.
He liked the New Orleans
I love
jazz.
it. Good for him.
So that's why I say I lost control around the 8th month of pregnancy.
Wow.
And I've just kind of been along for the ride, making sure he had what he needed, but I'm just along for the ride. Now
I
he's,
dig it.
he's in his late 40s
Sure.
now. So
Yeah. That's a great story. So at the end of the day, is the one that's kind of the marionette of your life and all of these things that you've done. Everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, fans, clients, colleagues, but you run it. You are in control. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I think, I think if I have a fault, it's that I have standards that I hold other people to that are too high, that are unreasonably high. That I think is my faults, right? My thing that I work on a lot is don't have this expectation of other people that is really unreasonable and too high. Um, and I have worked on that a long time. I'm pretty good at it now, but not perfect. Um, I believe that I'm a very good friend, but I'm an introvert. Everybody thinks I'm an extrovert. I'm actually an introvert.
Hmm.
Um, but because I'm an introvert, I like to be in charge. So when there's an event, I'm in charge of it. When there's something to be done, I'm in charge of it. That's why I was a CEO,
Yeah.
because I didn't want to be part of something. I wanted to be in charge of it so I had control over it.
Yeah.
The illusion of control, I should emphasize. I'm a good friend. I'm an introvert. I really live in my head a lot. But I also have a huge commitment to the human race as a whole. So I don't like people very much, but I love the human race.
There you go. I dig it. I get it. I get it. I get it.
Um, but yeah, I would drop everything for a friend in need
Yeah.
and just go do that. And I like that about myself. I make decisions based on what's going to bring me joy and what's going to be best for my community, rather than on how I'm going to make money, or am I going to be am I going to be liked for this, or am I going to be famous? I don't do it for accolades. I do
Yeah.
it for what do I think is going to be best for my community and myself, and for the people around me to be happier, more joyous.
Well, I got to say, you've written a wonderful book. Your life is an actual nonfiction that you're writing the best nonfiction novel of your life.
Thank you.
So if anyone out there wants to pick up your latest book, they want to pick up your other books, learn more about you, anything about your fascinating life, where do they go?
Well, I have a website, which is carylhallberg.com. Easy peasy. It's just my name.com. You can find my books there. You can buy my newest book there. The book's title is A Brush with Mortality. I'm under my own name, Caryl Hallberg. That's cool, right?
Yeah.
It's on Amazon in paperback and Kindle. It's also available at Barnes and Noble and literally any bookseller online and in most bookstores worldwide. It's only in English. I won't have an Audible version out for another 8 to 10 months. But right now it's available in ebook, Kindle, and paperback.
Excellent.
Um, and yeah, literally anywhere. But there's lots of links on my website to find me and learn more.
Excellent. Caryl, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your story. Thank you for your time. Keep doing
Thank
the
you.
wonderful
And
work.
thank you for being a good dad to a kid that needed a good dad. I
Oh,
really
it's
appreciate that too.
Yeah, he's my hero. And as you know, these kids have to try harder than anybody else on the planet to just be in a regular kind of sphere that
Yeah,
most of us are given. So yeah, it's good. It's my pleasure. I love being we run pretty hard together, so we get a lot of joy out of life. So it's good.
good. That's what I like to hear.
That's what I'm saying. It's when you said the fun thing, I want to leave on this note real quick since we kind of brought up jazz and your son. I saw this blind piano player. Um, Matthew Whitaker, he was amazing. And his
I know
whole
who that
thing,
is.
oh my, he blew me away. Like I interviewed him before he was on 60 Minutes about 4 years ago and didn't realize the power of him. And when I saw him live, he just kept saying fun. And he was shouting, he was channeling Stevie Wonder. He had that crowd up in the air. My wife, at one point, he played It's a Wonderful World, and she was in tears. Like every emotion that could have happened was
Yeah,
happening in that crowd. So there you go. It's all about having fun, and that's all he talked about. Have fun. Just let's have a good time.
there we go.
I
All
love it.
righty.
Cool. Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Take care.
Ciao.